All right. Hi, Boston buddies. Welcome to, what's today? It's hard to know what day of the week it is.
Very hard. It's tax day.
Yes, the old tax day.
Right.
It's Wednesday, April 15th. Brunch with Boston buddies and Amby Burfoot today. Thank you for joining us today, Amby. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, thank you, and appreciate the invitation.
Well, we appreciate having you. For those that don't know, Amby is the 1968 winner of the Boston Marathon. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of that in the crazy year, right? 2018. You got to run with the in the monsoon.
The monsoon it was.
Right. Which one will you remember more, the monsoon or 1968?
Well, 68 was pretty special, but so was 2018. They make a nice pair of bookends, I guess. So I treasure them both.
Right. Are you planning on running this year? Were you scheduled to run?
I wasn't scheduled to run this year, and I doubt I will work any miracles for September, but I have begun thinking about when I might want to run Boston again. So perhaps there'll be another.
Okay. Yeah, I had read that. I guess you do every 5 years from the anniversary for your anniversary.
I did 5 years from 68 through 2018, and actually I ended up running the last 6 years in a row, 2013 through 18. So I had a good streak going there. Now I'm sort of taking a few easy years and judging when to come back. I am 73, closing in on 74, and I can assure you it does not get any easier with the passing years. But if you adjust your pace accordingly, you can stay out there.
I don't know. I train with Gene, and he keeps getting faster. Gene Dykes.
You train with Gene?
He's a local Philly guy. Yeah.
Oh, I knew that. I didn't know you trained with him. He's astonishing.
Yes, and I can't beat him. He keeps getting faster.
Not many can.
Yeah. So how are you doing these days? Are you getting out much running, given the current climate of what's going on?
My runs this winter have mostly been just 3 miles at a time. Okay. I am an addicted exerciser. I have a recumbent bicycle at home, and so I'm on the bicycle also for about an hour, and that's when I do all my reading. Books, magazines, journal articles. The bike, I'm not really working out on it, in all honesty. I'm just pedaling and keeping awake and keeping my eyes open and reading whatever I can gather together.
Gotcha. And then I last weekend or 2 weekends ago, I guess you started a little mini movement for the current COVID crisis that we're having. You were putting masks on statues, right?
That ended up being quite a bit of fun because we did it first here in Mystic, where we have a fantastic statue of John J. Kelly, who was my high school coach and the '57 Boston winner. Yep. And my wife made an artistic shamrock Irish mask for him. And, then we went home, and I thought that was the end of it. And it suddenly dawned on me that I knew of a bunch of other famous runner statues. And of course, I also know people who live around the country. Yep. So I thought I'd try and reach out to them and see if they wanted to put masks on their local statues. And everybody was very enthusiastic, and everybody did it quite quickly. And we had 7 or 8 key statues with masks on them about 36 hours later. So it was a great project, people coming together in many ways. We emphasized that we were not using medical quality masks. We were just using bandanas and homemade things. Right. And it made quite a nice photo essay.
Right, that was great. And you enlisted one of our own, Marty Clark, to do Joni's statue, right? And
I found out from one of your other friends that Marty was on crutches because of a mountain bike or bicycle accident. I did not know that, of course. And he then told me that it was quite a struggle to get the mask on Joni with his crutches. But a policeman came along and first bothered him with, like, what are you doing, defacing property or whatever? And he explained it to him, and the policeman got it very quickly and then turned out to help him put the mask on Joni. So that was a great little anecdote.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, he made his name got into the New York Times because of that, because he took the picture, so they gave him photo credits in the New York Times article about yourself and your movement.
I know that because I sent it all to the New York Times.
Right, that was great. That was impressive. So yeah, I guess you'd mentioned John Kelly, right? The younger Kelly. He was your high school coach. Maybe can you talk a little bit about what that was like, having a real Boston Marathon winner as your coach in high school? That's pretty inspiring.
It was more than inspiring. It was life-changing for me, and I'll try to give you the executive summary, if you will. I grew up the son of a YMCA director type. So I grew up with all sports, and I played all the major sports when I was young.
Okay.
And I practiced them constantly. And I grew very skilled at the sports. And I had skills in baseball and basketball and even a little bit in football. And I thought, well, that's great. I'm going to be a, Major League Baseball player was my dream. But then, of course, you get to high school and you finally bump into some other people who are not only athletes, but they have actual physical prowess and power and speed and muscle. And I was a skinny guy. I was tall and skinny, and I didn't have any power or speed, and I got shoved all over the basketball court. And one day our coach was pissed off at us because we had been screwing up his practice session. So he punished us by making us go run the cross-country course for punishment instead of playing basketball. And it turned out that while I was the worst player on the basketball team, I was the first one back on the cross-country course. So having an IQ slightly above 50, I decided to switch sports and go from basketball to cross-country. Walked on to the cross-country team the next fall, and lo and behold, the local high school coach is John J. Kelly, 57 Boston Marathon winner, twice an Olympian, 56 and 60 in the Olympic Marathon for the US, 8 years in a row, the National Marathon Championship winner. No relation whatsoever to old John A. Kelly with the same name, but they were great friends. And young John, or Kel as we came to call him, was not just the best runner in the country, which he was by a goodly margin, especially in the marathon, but also the most intelligent, astonishing, forward-looking human being I've ever met in my life. And the simple best example of that is that in the 1950s, when he was winning the Boston Marathon, he had an organic garden and compost pile in his backyard, and he was organic gardening. And in the 1950s, the number of people in the US who even knew what organic gardening was probably single digits. And he was one of them, and he was practicing it passionately because he believed in all things environmental. He believed in all things focused on planetary and human health, physical and mental and emotional. Got a cat who might interrupt me here. And he was just the most astonishing example you could possibly imagine. Other runners at that point on their high school teams were being drilled with quarters on the track because that's what Jim Ryan did. So that's what everybody else had to do. And Kelly would take us on 5-mile frolics through the local parks and apple orchards and coastal areas, and everything was real cross country and nothing was arduous. It was hard, but it was sort of fun being out there. And so everything I learned about running, I learned by his example. He was not the type of, he never wanted to be a guru, and he never gave me the 10 commandments of running and told me this is the way you should run. Everything I learned from him and everything everyone else learned from him was simply by example, by watching his lifestyle, by running long runs with him on Sunday morning. And his happening to intersect with my life absolutely changed my life and put it on a trajectory which I've been fortunate to follow ever since.
Right. You've run Boston, you won Boston, you had a great career at Runner's World. You were the editor, correct? One of the chief editors?
Executive editor is just the title.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool. You got to be friends with this guy named Bart Yasso, right?
Absolutely.
He's the one that actually started all this with the interviews. He he called me up and said, "Hey, I'd like to make sure, get people's mood happy and make sure people are, have something to do during the day." And he was the one that suggested doing these interviews. So he kicked all this off.
Well, it was a great idea, and it's not surprising that Bart would come up with it because he's such a people person.
Oh, he's great. He doesn't live that far from me either. So we've been able to connect since all this happened, but we've been able to connect and run a few times as well with
Sure.
the group. Yeah. So who else from your high school class? I mean, if John Kelly was your coach, was there anybody else there that kind of made it to the professional level?
I can't. There was no professional level to be very, very sure. I got a bowl of beef stew after the Boston Marathon, just like everybody else, and
Okay.
I was a vegetarian to boot. But we had good runners. Nobody else that anyone would recognize. But Kelly had a number of teams after me that won state championships, and there were plenty of good runners around. And he encouraged them all in the same way that he encouraged me, and the ones that were as obsessed as I was or had talent or otherwise wanted to follow his example really did. It was after high school when I ended up at college in Connecticut, Middletown Wesleyan University, that we had this rather amazing occurrence where three of us, first Jeff Galloway, then myself, and then Bill Rogers, were at this tiny non-athletic liberal arts college at Wesleyan at the same time. And here we are 50 years later, and we have all spent our lifetimes in running in different ways, really. Jeff is the Pied Piper troubadour or everyday teacher of running, going to clinics all over the world and spreading the word. And I was at an editorial post, and Bill, of course, was out there at the races for so many years, spreading just the good faith and good humor and good the camaraderie that he's so famous for, the easy relaxation, the way we all mix together and feel friends when we are together, even if we don't necessarily know each other.
Yeah, actually, Jeff emailed me a little bit before this. He's going to do an interview as well with us over tomorrow or next week sometime. Yeah, we're trying to work out the details. But you were you roommates with Bill Rogers while you were there?
I was roommates with Jeff and Bill serially, one after the other. And okay. Yeah, absolutely. We were roommates and did a lot of running together. Of course, the story is college was my fanatic phase, to put it that way. And I was running twice a day in college and 120 miles a week. And I always tell people I went to college in the 60s, the era of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and I don't know anything about any of those because I wasn't doing them. I was out running twice a day, and Bill was running many of the afternoon workouts with me, but certainly not the morning ones for the most part. And he was enjoying the party scene down the road from Wesleyan whenever he could get out, and I was going to bed at 9:30 every night so I could get up and run the next morning. But Bill took what he saw from me and Jeff and applied it a few years later in ways that nobody could have foreseen or predicted, but he did an incredible job with it.
Right, he was four-time winner, I guess in the 70s, a little later after college. Was he really was he a standout in college?
Bill was not quite a standout in college. He was close. He could have been perhaps, but running wasn't his big focus then. It took him a few years of bouncing around after college and, various things happening in his life, as life happens to all of us. And one day he kind of woke up and decided, well, I'm going to pour it all into running now and see how far it takes me. And he took running farther than anyone could have imagined at that time. And it also took him farther than anyone could have imagined, because that was the time when people started opening running stores and launching clothing lines. And Jim Fixx wrote a book, Read Round the World. And New York City Marathon, went to the 5 boroughs, and everything happened in the mid 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, the Boston documentary does a pretty good job of explaining kind of like the handoff from you to Bill and the history of the marathon and just running during that time frame. We're actually having John Dunham and Tom Derderian is doing an interview on Friday to talk about the movie, and we're trying to promote the movies for Saturday night. We're going to try and have everybody watch the movie Saturday night so they can see your story.
It's on WGBH, right?
Well, you can download it. It's probably going to be free for certain people. Like, we've got people all over the world, so it depends. But yeah, if it's free, we'll advertise that. John's actually in Italy right now, so he's locked down pretty hard right now. But he's trying to film. He's trying to make his new film in Italy right now. So he's got a link up, and you can donate to the film, and then he'll give you the Boston documentary, so you can watch it.
Okay. Well, yeah, John and Tom and people who worked on that film, they did such an amazing job with it. And we all waited years for it to come out. And then we had the big gala premiere in Boston. And at that point, nobody except for them knew what the movie was about. I was aware of the fact that they very much wanted to do the history of the marathon as well as the history of Boston. And I was kind of like, oh my God, that's a big subject area there, guys. You got to watch out, because you can lose your grasp of the story you're telling. But they absolutely pulled it together, and the storyline of 2013 and 2014 of Boston was very, very compelling for those of us who have marathoning running in our blood.
Right. Yeah, they did a really great job. Just from the first, they go through the first marathon all throughout the John Kelly years, the John the younger years, just everything. I didn't realize Tom was such a historian of the actual marathon. He's got that book, the Boston Marathon book, which has basically every single race every year and like the story of what happened in it. And I learned so much just from, you can pick that book up and just learn so much in an hour.
I'll tell you what's remarkable about that book and the way Tom crafted it is, it's one thing to have the history of the Boston Marathon. He finished first, and 70 years later they let women run, and so she was first, and their times and everything. But Tom had a larger view, and he wove in the social and cultural history of the times in which the races were run, whether it was world wars or presidential elections or feminist women's revolutions. He got all of that into the fabric of the history of the Boston Marathon. And that's really what makes the book so special and so readable.
Yeah, the story of the Greek runner, Kyriakides, is that how you say his name? And how he was essentially the first charity runner. He came and he raised a lot of money for Greece after the war to rebuild Greece. It's not something I had ever heard of until I saw the documentary. And then they had the Japanese runner too. And it was like, these were pretty life-changing or epic events, and they all happened around this marathon.
Yeah, I mean, the Boston Marathon was so epic because for so many years, it was essentially the marathon in the world. You had the Olympics every 4 years, but you had Boston every April, and that was it. There were no other secondary marathons in any other countries to speak of. And so the whole world wanted to come to Boston and wanted to excel. Mm-hmm. And that's what made it so hard for Americans to win here, because you had the best in the world coming to Boston every year. But again, the history of wars and depressions and changes in women's status and all of that stuff, Tom gets that into the book as the backdrop to what's going on when we all run from Hopkinton to downtown on Patriots Day.
Right. And then when they talk about your story, they play The Impossible Dream, the song. Is there a connection there? Is there a history for that?
The connection is that I'm a pretty corny person, and memes or songs like that one resonated with me when I was young. And Bill notes that I played it all the time in our dorm room at college. And I'm not a musical person, as it turns out, and I don't know much but some of the old Broadway chestnuts, but I did certainly latch on to that one, The Impossible Dream. It seemed to say it all to me, and I knew almost from my first meeting with John J. Kelly that I wanted someday to achieve or attempt to achieve what he had done in winning the Boston Marathon, and the fact that I did is a freakish miracle. But I was driven by the dream, and I was driven overall.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point in the documentary. I love it. I think we should recommend that to everybody's playlist. People always ask for a song in the playlist. They need The Impossible Dream.
There you go. And people talk about playlists these days, and I've never ever heard of any of the songs in anyone's playlist. But so if you go back 50 years to some chestnuts, I might recognize a few.
Gotcha. So you don't run with music then, huh?
I don't run with music. I'll make this confession though. I have become very attracted to podcasts in the past couple of years. Okay. And I started out with NPR Science Friday, and then started adding some running podcasts, which I find immensely enjoyable, because like this chat, they go into so much more depth than you can get from any newspaper or magazine articles. So I feel like I really learn a lot about the people being interviewed and how they think and what makes them tick. Right. So I've become, podcasts are very enjoyable to me now. My running and walking is pretty slow and modest, so it doesn't interfere with anything I'm doing out there for 30 or 60 minutes.
Right. Do you ever think to maybe start your own, host your own chats with Amby?
I have thought of that, but I've also thought that there seem to be enough running podcasts and other podcasts in the world right now, so it's not necessary. I haven't found the perfect sports medicine podcast yet, and that would be interesting to for me or someone to do with a couple of people who are pretty versed in the sports health and fitness science side of running. But I'm sure someone's doing it. I probably just haven't found it yet.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a market for it. I think every runner on our page has some sort of injury, or at least they had one at some point in their life. Yeah.
Injuries are pretty much a given. Fortunately, most of them, I believe, are relatively minor. Not all, but most of them, if you rest and recover, you get over them. I always say we come back from injuries, but they never heal as quickly as we want them to. And we're always training for a goal race, and that makes it hard on the injuries. I've had my last 5 months, I've done less running than I've done probably in my whole life, because I've had a series of tiny little minor injuries. But I'm at the point in my life where I'm not going to risk anything developing into a major or a bigger problem. So if I have a minor injury, I ease back and lay off and rest. So I've had these things bothering me for 4 or 5 months. I think they're about ready to go away, and I'm looking forward to running some more this summer.
Yeah, that's why I always say to it's better to show up at the start line undertrained and healthy than not show up at all and injured.
I advise that to just about everyone.
Yeah. Marty Clark says hi, by the way. He's logged on and watching. He wanted to say hi.
Hey, Marty, I hope you're off the crutches soon.
And then there's another guy on our page that you've had a run-in with too. His name's Tim Moley. I don't know if you remember this guy, but you might remember what you did for him. Tim Moley, he's actually the guy that we've named this Moley Mile after.
Okay.
He had he did the marathon in 2007 crutches. Then he got full knee replacement surgery the next year, and he ran a BQ at Erie 6 months after that, believe it or not, after full knee replacement surgery. But one of the things that he does is push-ups. He loves push-ups. And he got you to do push-ups for him a couple of years ago, and you're on his push-up wall of fame. I think you did 2 of them at some event that he met you at. I don't know if you remember him or not, but that's the thing that he does.
My life goal is to be able to do push-ups, and I can't. I'm a complete failure. But I'm astonished when I read the people who do not just 100 push-ups a day. I think some do 1,000 or whatever it is that they do. It's just unthinkable and unimaginable to me. But I actually, I don't know if we're allowed to say this in public conversation. I do girls push-ups now. I do them on my knees, from the knees.
That's fine. They work.
But I'm down there every day trying to log a few. So it's my goal to be able to do more, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to get there.
Marty started the 100 push-up challenge for the month of April to keep people
Okay.
busy. So yeah, if you pop on the page, you'll see people doing push-ups. People typically do about 20 at a time, so they'll do 5 sets of 20 throughout the day. I'm not there yet. I can't do them.
I do close to that. I do 5 sets of 15 of my slightly cheater push-ups. So I'm getting close. I do like popping down onto the ground and doing them frequently. We've got a small exercise room in the house, so there's a carpet and a bunch of junk there that I can play with in between writing stints and reading and other things.
Okay. Now there's a race that the Manchester Road Race. Now, do you still run the Manchester Road Race? You had a long streak with that, right?
I still run Manchester, and I consider it my proudest accomplishment in running. It'll take me a minute right here to see how many, 63, 19, I think I've run 57 consecutively. And I always say to people, somewhat jokingly, you know, anyone can win the Boston Marathon. All you got to do is train your ass off for 4 years and have a lucky day, and you can win the Boston Marathon. But to run a given race 57 years in a row takes more than luck. You have to get out there sometimes with pneumonia, which I've had, with pretty bad Achilles tendonitis. One year I had this, I can't even begin to get into it, but I had this ridiculous disease called C. diff, oh my God, Clostridium difficile, which basically makes you have diarrhea all day long for weeks and months on end. And
Oh, wow.
I lost 15 pounds from my normal negligible weight. And when you lose 15 pounds from nothing, you get pretty sick. And I was very, very sick that year, but somehow I got through the 5 miler on Thanksgiving Day. And it's my most important running date of the year for sure. And it's one reason that I'll go easy on injuries at this time of year, because I know I've got to be healthy in November to get around the Manchester course. And it's been a race that I was fast at and winning many, many years ago. Now I'm in the middle, if not the back of the pack, and nobody knows I'm there, and there's no applause and no newspaper headlines and all the stuff that I used to enjoy. But boy, it's important to be there and to finish and put another notch in the belt there. I don't know how long I can keep going, but I'll keep after it for a while.
And it's 5 miles on Thanksgiving morning every year.
It's Thanksgiving. It's a short 5 mile. It's like 4.748. And they debated many years ago whether they would extend it to 5 miles or 8K. And I think everyone unanimously said, no, just keep the loop of town. It doesn't matter. It's the same distance. It's literally been the same distance every year I've run it. So I have this graph which shows my declining times and pace per mile over 57 years. But at this point, that doesn't matter as much as crossing the finish line.
Right. It's all about the camaraderie and just the fun of it. Yeah.
Well, seeing everybody on Thanksgiving Day is amazing, and it's quite a crazy scene because everybody shows. It's a 15,000 runner race, and everybody shows up for the race at the last minute because it's a morning race on Thanksgiving.
Right.
And they finish, and the town just empties out immediately because everybody's going back home to their family festivities and they're eating and their football games and whatever. So it's kind of like an instant happening race, but it pulls 15,000 people into this quite modest town.
Right, that's like that Boilermaker. You ever run the Boilermaker 15?
Boilermaker and Bix are two fantastic races because they take over the spirit and soul of the towns where they're run, and there are no races I've ever been to that have enjoyed more community support than those two.
Yeah, I ran Boilermaker once, and it felt like I was in a parade because everybody was on their porch. Like you're running through towns, and they're on their porch cheering you on and things like that, and then you finish up at the brewery. I think there's 15,000 that run the race or something, and 50,000 show up for the after party for the brewery.
I love the way the fans have to put their lawn chairs out on the roadside 6 hours before the race to make sure they get a prime space. It's kind of like the finish line of the Boston Marathon, but it happens all the way along the courses of these races.
Right. Anybody listening that hasn't run Boilermaker, I highly recommend that race. It's a fun one.
I do too.
Yeah. How about the Boston course itself? I mean, you've probably run this, I don't know how many times you've run it between training and the actual course and everything else. Do you have any words of wisdom for the first time runners that are listening?
Oh, I think everyone who's run Boston a few times knows what it is about the course. I always tell people it's a course it's got a narrow window to run a really good time. And if you run smart and you hit that window, you can run a good time at Boston. But it's got a really big window for blowing up and running a terrible race if you don't run smart. And of course, as in many marathons, but even more so at Boston, not running smart means going out too fast. Mm-hmm. The excitement is unbelievable at the Boston start, and especially if it's one of your first Bostons, you know, it's uncontrollable almost. You don't recognize how steep the downhill is at the start because you don't see it. You just see shoulders all around you. You don't realize how fast you're running until you check your watch. And usually when you get off at a too fast pace, it's kind of hard to throttle back and get onto the pace you should. So there are many, many more runners walking the last miles of the Boston Marathon than there should be, given the fact that they've qualified with good times. But when your legs cramp up going down Heartbreak Hill and into Boston, there's nothing you can do about those quadriceps. And, you know, often the breathing and everything else is fine, but if the quadriceps aren't there, you're not going to be running. Oh, yeah. And it happens to far too many people. So
guilty.
Everybody's done it. So start comfortably, stay modest, don't put money in the bank, you know. I'll give you maybe a minute at halfway if you need it, but not any more than that. And much better to be able to run strong, not only up the hills, but off the hills as well, because if you can finish strong those last 4 miles, it's like a lightning fast track. I used to spend months visualizing how fast I was going to run the last 4 miles at Boston. And then every year I got there, I was cramping and dying and not doing nearly the sub 5 miles I thought would be easy to do on that slight downhill slope. But if you finish strong at Boston, you pass a ton of people in the last 4 miles. And of course, that gets you psyched up to keep running and keep going strong and keep passing more people. And it's a glorious way to finish any marathon, but especially Boston.
Yeah. And as you heartbreak that last hill, to the Newton Hills, and that you go into Boston College, that is one of the steepest parts on the course. And I just know you've been going up for 4 miles and your legs are just killing you at that point. And then you start going down and you can fly at that point, but I know my legs have never had it in me to actually have any speed once I crested that hill. It's like you go over there and it's like all the muscles all the muscle, like they start cramping back up from the first 16 miles of running downhill, and you're paying the price.
For sure. And, you know, you can train for the Boston course, and you should, and you have to, and it will pay off if you not only run hills in training, but run downhills and run some hard downhills in training. But even that doesn't save you if you don't pace it right on race day. So the people who run well at Boston and finish strong are the ones who know what they're capable of and run the correct pace and just stay with it. It's one of those races where it's one of those courses where you can never push. You have to just always tell yourself, hold back, hold back, hold back, hold back, hold back, because it's going to eat you up anyway.
Yeah, if you can hold back until you crest that last hill, then you really can kill those last 4 or 5 miles, 4.5 miles or so. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done it, but it certainly looks like you could. I'd like to hear from somebody who's done it.
Right. Well, the year you ran or you won it, did you negative split that year, or were they?
You know, we didn't have the traditional splits then. We still had the little orange cones in the road that said, you know, 19 7/8 to go, or 14 3/4. We had these bizarre cones, and you know, I was running with a $10 sweep second Timex on my wrist, and we weren't looking at the clock at all. It was a competitive race, and I had a one-on-one battle, which I didn't enjoy, all the way up the Heartbreak, all the way up the 4 miles of hills. I was running against a fellow competitor who I knew quite well, and he knew me. And as I say, we both knew that he was going to outkick me at the end, because he was a miler and I wasn't, and he had the speed at the end. So I killed myself going up the hills, thinking that was the only way I could possibly win. And I dramatically remember going up the Heartbreak Hill and just giving it everything I absolutely had. And when he was still on my shoulder at the top of Heartbreak, I sort of did an, oh crap, and I kind of half collapsed and almost sank to my knees on the course. And then I kept myself going somehow. And what happened was he cramped up on the first foot of the downhill. Yep. And so I was struggling all the way to the finish because I had destroyed myself in the first 20 miles, but he was cramping, which was even worse. So it was very much a case of somebody having trouble on the downhills, which enabled me to win that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they didn't have splits and Strava and all this other GPS that they have these days. So like, can you go back and even look to see like what your splits were or anything? Like, were people writing them down for you?
No, you know, well, they had checkpoints, as they called them. And so they had traditional checkpoints, and I guess I could go look, but they're just not meaningful in today's era. So, you know, I don't know what my checkpoint times were. Right. It was a warm, sunny day, so we didn't run fast. I wouldn't call it hot and humid, but warm and sunny in April at Boston with no leaves on the trees is tough for most runners. And, you know, we didn't have water. We didn't have anything. We didn't have water stops in those days. There'd be a few kids out there, they'd hand something to you. And if you weren't careful, you'd eat a lemon instead of an orange. And then you'd go, you know, choke on the lemon. Right. So it was a totally different era. What was Boston, even in those days, were the crowds, and especially coming into town, the crowds were very, very thick. There was no police control whatsoever. So as I was running in the lead the last 4 miles, the crowds filled the road in front of me, and they opened like I was Moses to let me through, and then they filled in back of me. You know, I was looking back all the time to try and see if anyone was catching me, and all I saw was crowds of college kids in the middle of the road, because that's where they were standing with their beers.
Well, was Wellesley still there? Was that the thing? Like, did they have the Wellesley Scream Tunnel back then? Yeah,
well, Wellesley was still there. It wasn't quite as big or organized as it is now, but Wellesley has been there for a long time. I've got a few historical photos sometimes of the Wellesley crowd, and they've always been fantastic. And you know, Hopkinton was brimming with excitement, and all the towns along the course. I mean, it was a Patriots Day. Everything was closed down, and everyone in Boston watched the weirdos run the Boston Marathon. And certainly they all thought we were weirdos in those days, but they supported us nonetheless. And the last 5 or 6 times that I ran Boston after 2013 and 2014, I made little business cards and I carried them, and I handed them out to kids and grandparents along the side of the road. And they said, basically, thank you for your 120 years support of the Boston Marathon. It's you, the fans, that have made this the greatest race in the world, or something like that. It was my little thank you gesture, and it was a lot of fun to do.
For sure. Now, have you ever in the festivities at Wellesley? That's my favorite part of the course.
I, I have just once. I stopped and kissed a young co-ed, and the guy I was running with who worked for NPR got a photo of us, and so I have a photo of that I dangle in front of my wife of the one time that I engaged in the activities at Wellesley. Otherwise, I've mainly clapped back for them to thank them for their support.
Right. That's great. Yeah, the crowd really is one of the best parts of that whole course. That's really the first year I ran it. I did what you said I shouldn't do. I went out way too fast, and I was walking the second half.
Right.
And some woman came out of the crowd and got next to me and said, "You didn't come here to walk this course. You got to run." And she's like, "Come on, I'll start running with you." I have no idea who this woman was, and I still don't to this day. She's like started running with me. She had jeans on, like she was regular. She was at one of the fans, and she got me running. I just started running with her for maybe a quarter of a mile, and she's like, "All right, go ahead, keep going. You got this." And she went back into the crowd, and I never heard from her again. And I was like, I got to come back here every year. Every year, this crowd is just amazing. It was so much fun.
Well, of course, all of us big ego guys think the ladies are cheering for us, but imagine what it's like for the women when they come through and the support that they give them. That must be, well, we know that's spectacular.
Yeah. It's great to see. Yeah. We actually had Catherine Switzer on the other night, on Friday night. And she was talking about, obviously, the first time that she ran it and how the sport has changed so much since she started that movement. I guess, 1968. That was that the year before Catherine Switzer ran? I forget, because
that was the year after.
Year
66, 67, and 68 were the Bobby Gibb years. She was the first woman. Catherine ran 67. I don't believe she ran 68. I'm not positive of that, but the contributions of those early women and the stories and the things they had to go through, and whether it was crazy sports writers and photographers doing stories about them, or Catherine being assaulted by Jock Semple. Those are not proud moments in the history of running, but they certainly are historic storytelling moments in the history of running.
Right, it's a very famous photo. It really kind of set the ball in motion, though, because it's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this.
Probably the most famous, and people look at the photo and I think they believe that Jock was trying to kill her or maim her or something. And I always have to say, listen, he just wanted the number off of her sweatshirt. He just didn't like the idea that she was wearing an official number in his race. He wasn't going to break both her arms or anything. But he definitely looks so enraged that you can imagine the worst.
Now, do you know if there were any other women that ran the year that you won it? Because Bobby Gibb was running, but nobody really, there might have been other women, I don't know.
After 66, there were a handful of women every year, and I don't know who they were in 68, but there were two or three. People assume that we at the front of the pack knew what Bobby and Catherine and others were doing, but we didn't, because first of all, they were several hours behind us. Second of all, there was no sort of joint commingling or camaraderie with everyone. Third, they weren't allowed into the beef stew cafeteria where we were all relaxing afterwards. So while we guys, or everyone I knew certainly, were completely supportive of the women running, we didn't actually know them personally until 6 or 7 years later, when they started showing up at smaller New England and New York City road races where you could mix and get to know them a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And Fred Lebo had a big, he always had the women's runners in New York. He had a big part in bringing the women's into.
Yes. They had the mini marathon, the crazy legs and everything else. And then, of course, once Greta Weitz started winning New York so many years, that really her many years of success there really helped make her a shining light for so many other women.
Yeah. So I noticed, I did a little Googling on you before this. There's a Run with Amby website out there too. What people can sign up there and get some coaching services?
Run with Amby, thank you for mentioning it. It is a coaching website which I've never promoted a bit myself, because I haven't really decided if I want to put effort into coaching. I mean, I'm not a coach. I'm just a guy who happens to know a fair amount about running and training and think I could give people some common sense wisdom. So Run with Amby is a website. It's actually hosted by this group called Final Surge, which is a very, very nice log and training site. And I've got some training programs there. I've got one for beginning runners, and which sort of, rather than being the same for every beginning running, it actually asks you to put in your age and your weight and a few other things. So it's tailored a little bit. And then I have the usual half marathon and marathon training programs where I've developed a program not for elite runners and perhaps not for Boston qualifiers, although you could qualify, which does something different than in every other marathon program I'm aware of, which is to say that as those weekend long runs get longer and longer and longer, because they're hard and they tend to lead to injuries and problems, I cut back on the midweek runs where other programs are always increasing stuff all the time. I cut back on the midweek runs while the long weekend runs are going up. And I've had a number of people who've used the program successfully, and we'll see if I ever decide to do more with it.
Okay. I actually use that Final Surge app, or my coach uses it.
Exactly.
She plugs in the plan, and it basically connects to my Garmin, and it automatically uploads everything for me. It's great. I love it.
It's a very, very good back end for coaches. It's specifically for coaches who are working with a lot of athletes. And I've gotten to know the people who are behind it. And it's a very small group of very, very sincere programmers and runners who I happen to like a lot. So I feel good working with them.
Yeah. Do you ever think about like creating your own race now, like an actual Amby race, or get the gang back together, you, Jeff, and Bill, and the other guys, and just create like an easy race?
There seem to be enough races out there. I must admit, I guess I'm largely focused on older runners now. I mean, you're interested in who and what you are, yeah. And so I have a friend, Gail Kislovitz, who does the lifetimerunning.net website with me, and we do profiles of runners. To get into our site, you have to be over 60 years old, and you have to have been running for at least 30 years. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to tell people is there's this notion that all runners after 5 or 10 years have broken knees and bad backs and everything else. And the truth is that aging runners are doing very, very well. We're getting slower, to be sure, but a lot of us are in quite good health with knees and backs and everything that are still sustaining us. So we tell stories of those who've been out there for a long time and are still doing it. And I have another bizarre site. I'm a terrible webmaster, but I enjoy it. And I have another site which is called 100K lifetime miles, which is for people who have run more than 100,000 miles in their life.
Oh, wow.
I've found a few people who are over 200,000, which is incredible because that's more than like Bill and Frank and Joni. So there are some astonishing folks out there, and I just enjoyed sharing their stories.
That's amazing. That's a lot of miles. How many?
It's a lot of miles.
Yeah. Wow.
My wife's in the kitchen now saying, "That's too many miles, Amby. That's too many miles."
Well, yeah, you had just written an article. I saw it on Podium Runner about runners over 70 and how the effects of like the current COVID crisis, and how it could potentially affect them. But there's runners 81 years old, 84 years old. I'm looking at these stories, and it's amazing. They're out there running all the time.
I think runners are just the most amazing population. And you were talking earlier of the fast women who've got 2 or 3 or 4 kids and a profession at home. And then you've got the 85-year-old runners who are out there and won't let anything stop them. One of my great inspirations was my boss for many years at Runner's World, George Hirsch. And George is actually the chairman of the board of New York Road Runners and the marathon. And he's 85 now, and he's staying at home because, of course, he wants to stay healthy like everyone else. But he's working out for an hour a day or more in the little gym in his apartment complex, where people are signing up for individual hours rather than being there at the same time. And he's still running road races with New York Road Runners, and is as sharp and fit and healthy as a person can possibly be at 85. And there's so many people out there like that. And hopefully a lot of us know 1 or 2 people like that in every community, because, the only thing I can do in my community at this point in my running life, I can't beat anybody, but at least if I can show up at the races and look like I'm healthy and having a good time and enjoying myself, then I think that's a good message to put out to a lot of others.
I agree. And I still say, like, the runner, you're right, like the running community, there's definitely something different about it. And I see like runners in their 70s and 80s at these 5Ks and stuff, and it's like I hope I can do that. I really, like, it gives hope. Everybody doesn't have to have a sedentary lifestyle, and you can definitely enjoy your retirement years.
Well, we're all so motivated, and I don't know which comes first, whether running teaches motivation or motivated individuals find themselves running and becoming successful for it. But it's obvious, I think, to all of us who run that the thing that you need in running more than anything else is the consistency, the dedication, the discipline, and that's all about motivation. And the same skills, the same motivation will help you succeed in whatever profession you might be interested in, whether it's an academic one or arts or anything. You don't get anywhere without the consistency of effort. I'm researching and writing now some women who ran in the 800 meters in the 1960 Olympic trials, which were in Abilene, Texas, of all places. And this 1960 was the first time there was an 800 meters for women since 1928. They had been forbidden because everybody knew women couldn't run more than 200 meters. So that was the end of it for them. But in 1960, the Olympics opened up and there was an 800 meter race in Texas at the trials. And the women who competed in that race in 1960, I swear half of them ended up with PhDs. And this is at a time when women did not get PhDs as they do now. And a number of them got PhDs in hard sciences and mathematics and they went on to medical school. And they were just the most accomplished group of people you could possibly imagine. And I think that's been true for been very true for women runners. It's one of the most amazing things about them, that they balance so much, including still the family burden. But it's been true of so many runners in general. They're just such accomplished people. I mean, we've got Dr. Anthony Fauci in the headlines and TV every day, and Runner's World profiled him 25 years ago because we knew he was a runner then. And you can look at him and see the runner in him, and also listen to the logic that he applies to the situation, and realize that he probably knew how to put together a pretty good training schedule for himself.
Right. He looks great too. And I heard I think he's 79 right now, I think. I couldn't believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. He looks younger than me. So have you, I'm down in Philadelphia. So have you ever run down in the Philadelphia area, Philadelphia Marathon or the half marathon or art museum, done the Rocky Steps?
You mean you haven't looked up the results of the 1966 Dr. Ruth Roth Marathon 3 laps around the Art Museum? I ran in December of 1966. I took what we called the milk train from southeastern Connecticut. It left here at 2 o'clock in the morning. It arrived at Philadelphia's 30th Street or whatever at 7 or 8 o'clock. A friend of my father's picked me up and took me to the start of this little marathon in Philly, and I had absolutely one of the best running days of my life. I remember how fantastic I felt that day, and it was three loops, you know, and I ran negative splits on each of the loops. The second was faster than the first, and the last, and I ran 2:24. I mean, I had a really good race in a December marathon with no competition after being on a train for 5 hours. And of course, while I was at Rodale, we went down and ran the half marathon, the one that was then in mid-September. We did that annually. So I haven't run a lot of races in Philly, but I've run a few. I know of the history of Philadelphia running and New Jersey running, and some of the Browning Rosses and others who did so much in the early days. So yeah, Philly's always been a hot spot for distance running in this country.
Yeah, that loop, that 8.4 mile loop is where I train on weekends. That's this weekend. I'm doing my solo marathon and doing 3 loops. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Good for you.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't until a relative few years ago that I discovered the Wissahickon Park Trail.
Yeah, trail system.
That's just astonishing. That's one of the great running trails in the country because of just where it is and down in that canyon there, and it's cooler in the summer, I'm sure, and a wide flat trail. It's unbelievable.
We have trails that'll go from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, like halfway across the state.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the trail systems in around are actually really, really good. Yeah. So,
I know if I lived there, I would be exploring the trails off the Wissahickon all the time.
well, you're welcome anytime. Get you, Bart, myself, and Gene, and a few others, and go running.
Well, I don't want to run with Gene. That would be crazy. but I'd like to hang out with Gene. That would be fun.
Yeah. Any other parting words for the listening public out there?
Well, I just hope, like everyone, that we see each other in September. I'm looking forward to the idea of a September Boston, just because it would be unique and different and a new experience. It would feel certainly like a big celebration for all of us to be able to get together there then. I'm hoping and praying, like everyone, that things will clear up enough so that it happens. And in the meantime, I think everyone should chill, take it easy, stay healthy. Don't worry about achieving peak fitness in 2020, because it's just not a year when you need to be fit. It's a good year to stay fit and look forward to future years of big races.
Right. Well, I'm inviting you to our shakeout run the day before the marathon. We do 3 miles down at Boston Common. Feel free to come and join us. Last year we had about 150 runners. This year we had about 350 people signed up for the shakeout run. It's just a super easy shake the Sunday before the marathon in Boston Common. So hopefully you can join us. If not, we have an after party at what's called the Cheeky Monkey across from the stadium. So we'll all be there celebrating after the marathon.
I look forward to it.
Great. Well, again, thank you for the interview. And again, stay safe during this time. Appreciate the time that you gave us today. And as always, thanks for all you do for the running community.
Thank you, Vince, and stay well to you and everybody else.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.